So I'm going to start off with a Netflix product story. So in 2016, a chance experience changed how I fundamentally think about approaching building software. I had been at Netflix for about 5 years, maybe 6 years at the time, and I'd been working mostly on infrastructure projects. So if you remember, back then, a lot of applications were being moved from the data center to the cloud, and I was hired to sort of do that kind of stuff. So I learned a lot during that time. But something changed when I started working in product development, and I'm going to talk about that today. All right, anyone remember 2016? Hopefully this is the last of it, but Game of Thrones was, the sixth season of Game of Thrones was released in 2016. Most people learned what Hodor meant then, you know, in a quintessential Game of Thrones moment, right? Very tragic. In other entertainment news, Hamilton was nominated for 16 Tony nominations. And of course, Stranger Things was released by Netflix. So a lot of stuff happening in the entertainment landscape. But on the product side, something else was happening. 2 years before, Netflix had raised its prices in the US for the first time for its streaming plans. And at that time, we did not raise prices for our existing customer base. And we had grandfathered them in 2014 when we raised prices for a period of 2 years. So, of course, as any customer-focused company, we started on a learning agenda to figure out how to message our price increase to our customers. Now, pricing is a very sensitive issue, right? It's critical to any business function, but also Netflix, you know, like every other company, raises prices from time to time so we can reinvest it into our content and our product. So what do we do? Well, let's take a pause on that for that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my work up until then. So I was primarily an infrastructure engineer, like I said. I was building services and applications, migrating data to the cloud, working on services, primarily on the notifications platform. I'd also started working a little bit in product development and started doing some A/B tests. What I found was there was something missing while I was still trying to get better at being a product developer. So, as part of the price changes, the product team and me being the lead engineer on the team, we went to a focus group in Walnut Creek, California. So I walked into a dimly lit room. I was late, as usual, as most engineers are, and the interviews had already started. So kind of like this room, except I can't see you guys, you can see me. So I was in the opposite position over there. I noticed a few familiar faces, the product manager, the product designer, there was a prototyper, consumer insights groups, and of course the facilitator was on the other end, or on the other side of the screen talking to Netflix member. We were asking questions about the product, about the price, and throughout the day a bunch of Netflix members came in, and we were trying to understand how our customers felt about Netflix as a product and the price that they were paying. Something changed in me that day. I sat with rapt attention. This is the first time I was part of a focus group. And as I listened to customer after customer, I slowly started sensing something. What was missing was my product sense and business sense all coming together in that room. So I walked into that room, primarily an infrastructure engineer thinking about scale, availability, extensibility, simplicity, all that stuff. But when I walked out of that room, I started connecting more to the business and to the product. My name is George Abraham. I'm a director of engineering at Netflix. I've been at the company for about 12 years. And for the majority of the time there, I've been in product development. I've led strategic initiatives, built out a lot of features, and to the latter half of my time there, I've built teams that are both functionally, technically excellent, but also deeply connected to the business and the product. And today, I'm going to talk to you about building high-performing product development teams. Now, I say this, developing product development teams, but these are actually useful tactics for developers themselves. Because eventually, as you progress through your career, it's not just going to be the technical excellence that's going to make a difference in your growth. It is how you connect your work to the product that you're working on and the business. So this is good context for all of you. I'm going to talk about two things, curiosity and empathy. Now, of course, being a strong engineer requires you to be functionally excellent in your domain, right? Like, so if you are a data engineer, you need to know all about pipelines, the latest technology, stuff like that. If you're a back-end engineer, you need to learn the latest, whatever is the latest languages, how to scale, AWS. I hear all this jargon. These things change all the time. But some things that are needed, especially in product development, are these two things, curiosity and empathy. So research has shown that curiosity actually leads to fewer decision-making errors. And this is kind of important because a lot of times in product development, local teams are making a lot of decisions, and then they all merge together into one cohesive product. So having curiosity will help you understand all of the things that need to work together to build a product. It's also more innovative, and that's intuitively true, right? Like if you're curious about multiple functions, your partners, the business, etc., you can connect the dots much better. And finally, curiosity also reduces group conflict. Product development, by its nature, involves working with large cross-functional teams with a lot of conflict. But if you're curious about the product, other functions, and the business as a whole, it reduces group conflict. So there are a bunch of areas you could focus on to build your curiosity on, but I'm going to talk about two things, business and product. And these are what I would consider like the bare minimum if you're developing product to have curiosity in. And notice this, I'm not talking about the engineering aspects of it. These are more outside of the technical space. So every business has core metrics, top priorities, and some sort of research on the competitive landscape. Getting teams to understand these things you need to do this more intentionally and to get a durable learning within the organization. If an entire organization understands the core metrics of the business, what the top priorities are, and understand how we fit in the competitive landscape, teams will be able to build products much better because they can make better decisions. So what are some core metrics, right? So core metrics would be, for instance, revenue, business core metrics. For Netflix, for instance, we track a lot of these things in a single site, and I'll get to more on that later. So how do you develop this business curiosity? On your teams or for yourselves, you should create artifacts that are easily discoverable, broadly shared, and are reinforced continually. Now, all of these three things, if you do right, is sort of like a virtuous cycle. Metrics are easily discovered, a business context is easily discovered, and shared broadly and continuously reinforced, which means it just becomes part and parcel of your work environment. So at Netflix, we have a single website that has a short URL, I think it's called Go Metrics, that has all key business metrics, and anyone in the company can get it. So the tagline there, this is a screenshot from the dashboard. The biggest things we measure, how we measure them, and where to find them. As you all know, as companies scale, one of the hardest things to scale is information. And so having something be very easily discoverable is the best way to scale that information. So at Netflix, some of the metrics that are captured on this site are revenue, subscriber growth, cancel rate, content performance, and engagement metrics, so how many people are watching, et cetera, broken down by country, all sorts of dimensions. And it's not just there as sort of a word salad with a lot of numbers. They're explained in very easy to understand terms. And then for those who want to dig in deeper, it's also, they're linked to other parts of the business where you can get more detailed metrics. Now you can imagine like if everyone in the company understood the metrics. Usually these things are like added to onboarding roadmaps. So engineers, as soon as they come to Netflix, they understand what everybody cares about. We also regularly share business updates. So this, a lot of companies actually do. It happens through the organizational structure, right? Like, the executive team sends out a memo, and then it gets trickled down through the entire organization. We do something a little different. We have other forums that essentially to reinforce this sort of broader business update. Our quarterly business review, what we call QBR, is timed to release with earnings, right? We have an email that goes out pretty regularly, like weekly, called a Take 5, which is meant to be like in 5 minutes you're supposed to get business context out of it. So it's not like this huge memo. You can just read it. People are busy, right? How do you scale that business context? Of course, we have like company town halls, live streams, and Slack messages, etc., or Slack channels where company information is posted. But it's on leaders and individuals to sort of be engaged in this way. So how do you get that part happening? We have team discussions. So here's an example of our investor page. So a QBR memo goes out when the investment call happens, and then local teams discuss these things. So for instance, like the games teams might look at the QBR memo, pick out a section from games, and then talk about that in their local team engineering meetings, right? Like it's an engineering team meeting, but we talk about business performance, and regularly. We also do this for like launch announcements and a bunch of other things. So doing this, all these three tactics will sort of permeate this business context throughout the organization. So it has to be easily discoverable, the business context, shared broadly, and reinforced continually. All right, so the second area that I want to dig into is product. Before I started getting interested in business context, I had started out with product context because that was what was more directly affecting my work. To build great products, your teams and you need to have excitement for the product. A lot of people can't build excitement for something that they don't understand about. So then it just becomes a job. It's a coding job that you just need to do. There needs to be a sense of ownership. If you feel like you own part of the product, you are more invested in building things. And so there are ways to cultivate that on your team. And then what I call product domain expertise. Now this is not technical expertise. It's product domain expertise. And I'll get into that more. So here are some tactics I've used on my teams to build product curiosity. Product teardowns. This is essentially where, as a team or as an individual, we go through a product feature or a product area and essentially dissect it. This is not like a brainstorming session. This is actually taking a real-world example and breaking it down and seeing what does well, what isn't doing well, in our opinion, and then try to come up with a discussion around it. The second is an idea forum, and this is around bottoms-up idea generation. And the last is knowledge sharing, but not necessarily from a technical sense, but from a product domain sense. All right, so how does a product teardown usually work? Here's an example that I did when Disney launched its streaming service. So at midnight or whenever it was, I signed up on their iOS app. I took a bunch of screenshots, added a bunch of notes, and then sent it out to my team, and we had a discussion around this. Now, what this is doing in and of itself is building the product muscle of the team, an engineering team, and for me, because I'm taking a critical eye and essentially, putting on multiple hats, a product manager's hat, a designer's hat, a content design hat. So even like, drilling down into the copy, for instance. So let's do a product teardown exercise. So this is the non-member homepage for Netflix. It's essentially a landing page when you go to netflix.com. Anyone find any of this interesting? Like, what are these things here? What's interesting here? I'm okay waiting for an awkward pause till I hear some answers. Say it again? There's an email and an action button. Yes, that's the big red button. That's what you're meant to do. We want to sign up for Netflix. Anything else? Go ahead.
It says unlimited.
Unlimited movies, TV shows, and more. Yes, that's our headline there.
I can see it's also very minimal, so it encourages the user to do something else.
So it's a minimal kind of design. Is that what you said? Yes, so encourages the user to do more. Go ahead.
Well, as a consumer, I see that there is Watch Anywhere, which is very convenient.
Watch anywhere, yes. So all of these are like value props that the company is showing, right? Go ahead.
Focuses on member sign-up.
It focuses on member sign-up, yes. It's not on login. See, that's interesting, right? Like, why is the login button at the top? Cool. Go ahead.
So on that track, every time I see the screen, it's super annoying because the only thing I want to do is sign in.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll get back to that. Yes. So this is interesting, right? Because you're putting yourself as a customer, but there's a tension there. There's a tension between customer needs and business needs, and maybe that has something to do with it. From you, oh, okay, that too. Lots of opinions. Yes. All right. So let's do a comparison. So that's Disney on the bottom. Non-member homepage. Any similarities or any differences?
It doesn't say cancel anytime.
It doesn't say cancel anytime. Okay. Yeah. You can change language, yes, but Disney's still new. They're gonna catch up. Yes, so that's interesting, right? Like they're more, focusing on their IP. They have very strong IP, very well-known brands, and that's what they're leaning into. I'll point out another thing. If you look at the title art of the background, it's a grid. It's showing a breadth of content, right? Of course, on Netflix, it's slanted a little towards the bottom, and Disney, it's slanted towards the top. But really, yeah, but there are reasons for this. The non-member homepage of Netflix has been tested over many years and optimized for our core metrics. And essentially, our core metrics is to sign up customers on this page. Like on this page, we're not looking for people to watch more, right? We're getting them to sign up. And so that's the reason why we have that on the top. There's another reason for the sign-in button to be on top. It's not the most used button on this page, because a lot of people, when they sign in for Netflix, they're not logging out all the time. Like most of the people are just remain signed in. Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's take a look at HBO and Apple TV+. It's very different. If you notice, they are, and it's probably truer to their brand, right? Like they're not looking for breadth of content. That's not their value proposition. They're looking for tentpole titles that they're showing, right? Like, so when Game of Thrones was out, that was probably what was like, House of Dragon, I guess. That was the hero image for HBO. And you can see Apple has a little different take on it. They're, touting their key characters, Ted Lasso, Tom Hanks, etc. But this stuff is interesting. And before becoming a product developer, I wasn't thinking about any of this in terms of building product, right? But when you do, you build excitement for what you're building, what you are building, and you feel much more connected to it. All right, so let's talk about ownership. Idea forums are a great way to build ownership inside the product. So it's essentially bottoms-up idea generation, right? So the way you do it is you ask your team to come up with ideas for the product roadmap. It also builds product muscle because now engineers are actually having to think like designers and content designers and product managers and data scientists, and that brings product muscles. And you'll be surprised, we're all human, we're all building stuff for each other. So you will have great ideas once you start exercising that muscle, and there'll be surprising wins. I have a template on my website about an idea forum. The spec that I kind of use. So in the minimum, it's a little more structured than a brainstorm. So what we ask is that our engineers or any other team members who want to bring an idea to the idea forum spend some time putting their thoughts in writing. So unlike a brainstorm, which is much more free form, an idea forum is required for you to exercise those product muscles. So we ask for, what is the background or motivation? For instance, like what problem are you trying to solve? What are you trying to, which customer area are you going to help? The opportunity size. So how many customers will be affected? So when you're doing a brainstorm, you can say like, oh, put this button here or there. But like, you have to really think through like, who are the people that are going to be exposed to your idea, and what's the business upside for it? If it's an A/B test, what are the testing variables? Is copy sensitive? Is design sensitive? Things like that. And so at Netflix on my team, I worked with the product manager to sort of carve out 5% of my team's bandwidth to work on team-driven ideas, right? And the product manager was super excited about this because that's a way to get more excitement and ownership into the product, right? And then after we did this for a couple of years, we found in one of those years, there were, of the top 10 revenue-generating growth A/B tests that Netflix ran, a bunch of them were team-driven. And this is amazing because there's a product management function that most people expect to come up with all the ideas. But we all know that ideas can come from anywhere, and the best ideas are the ones that win. So instead of concentrating idea generation to a small group of people by building a more product-focused team, it can come from anywhere. Okay. Finally, knowledge sharing. This, a lot of teams already do. So we have other companies come talk to us. So for instance, on the notifications team at Netflix, we had Spotify and Pinterest come and share their experiences with us. Now, their product experiences are very different from ours because it's a different kind of audience. We optimize for different things, but still, overall, it'll help you build better product muscle. So for instance, Netflix, the notifications function of Netflix is very product-oriented, so driven by a lot of recommendations, not a lot of, frequency, et cetera. But like if you go to retail, where it's driven by, I would say like seasonality, you'll see a very different tactic. And understanding those differences are important. We also have people speak at conferences and meetups and things like that. So here's an example of Max, an engineer on my team, who spoke at Sub Summit in Orlando, where he was talking about notification strategies for payments. Now, this is not just useful for career growth for your team and building more of that ownership and excitement. It's also practically useful for the team in building good product foundations, because you're going to have to distill like your domain knowledge for a broader audience. And in just doing that, you will think about product a little bit better. Finally, we also share some of this. Like you can search for messaging at Netflix, and you'll see a website where this is all shared, and that builds excitement within the team. All right, let's talk about empathy, the other side of that coin. Curiosity breeds empathy, and this should be fairly obvious, right? Like, so if you're curious about someone, it involves like perspective taking, and when you do that, you understand things better. And research has shown that being empathetic leads to more innovation, engagement, and retention. Most people understand the retention part. We've all had horrible bosses, and we haven't stayed. But when we've had empathetic bosses who understand you, we've stayed. So it's the same in business and how you get things done too, in teams, et cetera. So I'm going to talk about developing empathy for like two groups of people. Your customers, obvious, but a lot more intentional than most people do, and your partners, the people that you work with. So when I talked about the story about how I went into that focus group, that's when I first started empathizing with customers, right? Like what I found was there's a lot of things that we as engineers, when we're sitting down day in, day out, that we make assumptions of, that when we go out and talk to real customers, completely out of line. So I'll give you an example. At the time, Netflix, we didn't have the mobile plan like we do today in some markets. So essentially, you could watch Netflix on any device. Somebody pointed that out, right? Like watch anywhere on any device. So if you had 10 devices, you could watch on all. You could have that app on all 10 devices, right? So maybe your son is watching a show in his bedroom while you guys are watching the show in another show in the living room. So we had this notion of concurrent streams, which is what I said. Two people watching at the same time, different shows, or even the same show, in two different rooms on two different devices. But a lot of our customers had conflated these two concurrent streams with devices, which is a very elementary stuff that we didn't even think about, right? Because we've been thinking about streams all the time, that it was a big miss to see that there was confusion around, someone on a standard plan who could watch two movies at the same time were thinking they could only have two devices that had Netflix. And this was like a big shock to me because it was not anything that we all had thought about. So talking to your customers that way will empathize, and we'll change our strategy. We were there for a pricing strategy, right? Like how can we raise prices when our customers didn't even understand like what all they could do? They were getting more than what they thought they were getting. All right, here are some ways to develop customer empathy. Talk to your customer service people. Number 2, consumer insights. If you have a consumer insights team, they're a great resource. They synthesize a lot of the work of research, and you get to understand more about your customers. And the third one is a wild card. It's known as a field study, where you embed yourself in a market with your customers and see them day to day. So I'll go into all of these. So this is Somu, an engineer on the messaging platform team. The messaging notifications team did an offsite at our customer service help center. So we spent the entire day talking to our customer service agents who are on the front line, talking to our customers, and then also listening in on calls. And it's amazing when you actually listen in and compare notes. Your work becomes real. You see like what you're doing matters, right? When you go back and you're scaling your services, et cetera, it happens somewhat in a vacuum if you're not thinking about the overall goal. Also, it was a nice, the second day we had karaoke and a bunch of other fun stuff. So, consumer insights, like a lot of companies have consumer insights. If you're a small startup, maybe not as much, but it's a critical team in understanding your customer base and the product function, et cetera. And if you don't, typically this team will synthesize qualitative reports, surveys, et cetera, and present to product teams so you can understand how decisions are being made about a particular feature, right? So before we start, it doesn't make sense to just like, let's throw something and see what sticks. You want to like try and contain your big idea to like some practical ways to start and then build on it. And consumer insights helps us to get there. Now, if you don't have a consumer insights team, there are a lot of publications that does market research, and I'm sure for each of your industries you'll find one. And so we share all of that with the team, and there are Slack channels where these sorts of discussions happen about research into the area of the product that you work on. And finally, field study. When Netflix wanted to grow in Asia, one experiment we did was we sent a cross-functional team into the field, so to India and Japan. I wasn't on that team, although I wanted to be. And so they spent a couple of weeks in market and going into people's homes and observing through a facilitator and understanding more deeply how the product is experienced by those markets, right? And some of those learnings, when they came back, ended up being global wins. For instance, from Japan, there was a small idea of changing a copy on the non-member homepage, and that resulted in like incremental millions more dollars for Netflix at the scale at which we operate. And moreover, that learning was compounded because after we tried it on the non-member homepage, we tried it on the email canvas, and it showed wins there too. So a lot of these things sometimes you can't get by just a product manager sitting and thinking, right? You have to like connect all of these dots together. So a couple of ways to build product muscle. Finally, I want to talk about your partners. Before that day in February of 2016, when I went into that focus group, I knew of all these partners, but I didn't know deeply what they did. Now, in any organization, you have to organize in some way, right? And typically they're by function. But these boundaries are not rigid. Like they're not like our, I would say like engineering contracts between one service to another, like very strict or maybe loose depending on what technology you use. But these boundaries are meant to be broken from time to time so that you can connect the dots much better. So if you don't understand how your XD team operates, why they care about the things they care, or how the CI team operates, or content design, or the people who write copy, there's a strategy behind copy. For instance, if you want to send an account message, it needs to be direct and to the point. But if you want to send something engaging, it needs to be delightful. Building all this will help you understand the product muscles better. Data engineering is huge now, right? Like a lot of decisions are made using data. So if you don't understand how the pipelines are created, what matters, the scale at which they operate, you might be making decisions that prevent you from like working well together. Similarly, data science and your peer engineering teams, product management, etc. So how do we develop partner empathy? So there are a couple of ways. One is when we work on things, we do brown bags and invite people to come to our team meetings, and then our engineers showcase some of the work that they're doing. This is stuff that a lot of teams do. We also do road shows, whereas we can't expect everyone to come to our brown bags. People are busy. So we take the time. So for instance, I talk to other managers and say, hey, can we come and do a roadshow about our notifications work that we're doing on your team so they can understand? So we'll go to the consumer insights team or the XD team and talk about what we do. And then there's cross-functional forums, which is all of these different functions come together in a particular area of the product, and we discuss any area of importance. So maybe one day, the consumer insights team will present something about the research that they did, and then the engineering team will provide some context around like what they're doing to sort of take that learning and build a product out of it. So all of this together will build a more cohesive organization that are able to connect dots and work cross-functionally together. So I'll end with another story, putting all this stuff together. So we had done a product teardown called 15 Days of Rejoins. So my team, essentially, we took 15 days, and each person on my team picked a random company and did a product teardown on the cancel flow. So essentially, you signed up for a subscription service, you canceled it, and tore down the experience. And out of that came many ideas. One of the ideas that I got out of that was there was an email design that we call the personal note design. So most emails are flashy, lots of images, but this email from Harry's was just plain text and had like crisp value propositions about what they were trying to ask the customer to come back. So I thought that was a pretty good idea. And now, separately, at another time, I was looking at rejoins, and I had worked with the data engineering team, understood their pipelines, and I noticed some numbers weren't matching. So as I dug more and I worked with them, I found out there was a larger opportunity to talk to our rejoin customers through email than we initially anticipated. Now, I was able to connect these dots because I had curiosity about all these areas. And then in an idea forum, I pitched a well-timed email. Like literally, to send an email is pennies. I think it's like a cent for hundreds of thousands, or hundreds or 1,000 emails, something like that, right? In terms of like how much volume it is. So it's not much return on investment. So we created this, I created a hypothesis about reaching out to Netflix customers who have canceled when they revisit the Netflix site. And that email, when we tested it, brought in an incremental, any guess? Actually, I won't make you guess. $4 million. Just a single email. Now, of course, these things matter at scale. If you're a smaller company, maybe not that much. But the sensitivity there is, but the point I'm trying to make is, these things are sensitive, but nobody would have thought about this if you couldn't connect all these dots together. That email is actually still generating money for Netflix. This was a couple of years ago, and as our member base increases, that becomes even more valuable. So, developing curiosity and empathy for your partners, for your customers, for the business will lead you to build better product development teams. And if you're an engineer, I would urge you to invest in time figuring out how you play a part and how all your cross-functional teams play a part, and then be more connected with your customers. All right, thank you. That's my time.